Hello again, everybody. This is Pastor Tony coming at you again with today's word in season, a word of encouragement for you. And in fact, today I think today's not only a word of encouragement, but also a word of instruction to us as well. And it's something I've experienced and gone through over the last couple of weeks. And I've had to spend a little bit more time than usual looking at news reports and looking at other things, trying to make decisions about the church and what we're going to do and all those kind of things. And I started feeling kind of weary and worn out. And I knew that wasn't just outside in the flesh, but it was something that was going on in my soul. And, you know, there were some things that had gotten in there that were beginning to trouble me and begin to draw and actually extract strength rather than administer strength to me. And of course, when that happens, you don't just sweep that under the rug, and really you could sleep it, but you're not going to be able to sleep that off. If you got your eyes focused on the wrong thing, I'm talking about the eyes of your heart, then eventually it's going to catch up with you, and it's going to produce some things in your own soul that's going to produce weariness. And so I had to really deal with that, and I believe that kind of all of us are the same. So, you know, if I had to deal with some of these things, I know everybody else is as well. And sometimes we just got to go back and take an inventory of the kind of things we're subjecting our eyes and ears to. But I found this over and the Lord reminded me this over in Psalm 127. Psalm 127, verse 1 and 2, it says, "Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." First of all, we shouldn't be looking at anything to be our source or trusting in anything other than the Lord himself. Because if God's not in it, it's not going to work. I can tell you right there. And he's telling us, don't get your focus, don't get your eyes on men, governments, institutions, reports of men, anything else that people are saying. He said, get your eyes on the Lord. Then in verse 2 it says, "It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, and to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he gives his beloved sleep." And this is where I found it right here. It says to eat the bread of sorrows. See, we can feed ourselves on the wrong bread. And that's what he's talking about right here. If you're eating the wrong bread, the bread of sorrows, by just looking at news endlessly and news reports and analysis and analysis of analysis and analysis of analysis of analysis, it just goes on forever. And I can tell you, very few of them, if any, have the report of the Lord. They're not telling you from a perspective that God's going to turn this around, we should expect good. No, they're telling you how everything's going to turn out bad. They're giving you worst case scenarios. They're trying to get in your head. They're trying to get you glued to the TV to see what's going to happen next. And I tell you, pretty soon, you've eaten enough bread of sorrows, that'll get down on the inside of your own heart and your own soul and produce troubles. Troubles will enter in, and it'll begin to draw strength, make you weary, exhausted. You won't be going with refreshment. You'll lose your peace and joy. Well, what's the answer for that right there? Well, let's go over to the Gospel of John, chapter 6. The Gospel of John, chapter 6. Now, Jesus was actually debating with some of the religious people one day, and he finally said this. He said, "I am the bread of life." He said, "I am the bread of life." He said, and then he said, invites people, "Come, feed upon me, eat my flesh and drink my blood." Well, they got mad and offended. They didn't stick around for Jesus to explain that, and Jesus didn't go running after them. But he eventually said it this way in verse 63, and this is really what eating the bread of life or feeding upon Jesus means, the bread of life. Verse 63 says, "It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing." Your flesh is not going to profit. It's not going to figure a way out of this. It's not going to produce any lasting results. It's always going to have side effects attached to it. But notice he says, "The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." See, that's contrasted. Are we spending enough time feeding upon Jesus, the bread of life? That is the words of the living God, words of life, words of the Spirit. See, if we're feeding on him, the bread of life, the words of God, then we're going to be refreshed. We're going to be administered strength and peace, even during times of trouble, even during things going on around us that can cause us to be anxious otherwise. The feeding on Jesus, feeding on the Word of God is going to make all the difference in our life. It has in mind the last couple of days. I had to adjust this. Are we eating the bread of sorrows? Feeding upon the world and what the voices of the world are telling us, and social media and everything else. Some of those are not good. But are we feeding on the Word of God? We're going to have to draw aside and make sure that every day we're feeding on the right thing, that we're focused on the right thing. We're feeding on the bread of life, feeding on the words of spirit and life, and not feeding on the bread of sorrows all the time. You start feeding on the bread of sorrows, and those anxieties, worries will begin to drag you down, make you weary, discouraged, fearful. It'll cause you to even lose sleep, and that just perpetuates the problem right there. Where it would be more important and more advantageous and beneficial for us to just spend that time feeding on the words of the living God and becoming stronger. I believe we're going to come out of this stronger than what we have going into this. But it all has to do with what we're feeding on. What bread are we eating? I tell you, that's a good word for all of us. Well, that's all the time I've got for this one. I'll be coming at you again with daily words of encouragement and instruction. But be blessed, be strong, feed upon the words of God, and we'll see you next time.